Mine not North Dakota. You know, it's funny, my, I have a cousin who lives in mine. I just. Yeah. Yeah. Planning board meetings will be held in person at the meeting hall on the second floor of the Bernardsville Municipal Building at 166 Montrose Road. Meetings will be live streamed on YouTube with no opportunity for public comment on YouTube. Members of the public wishing to offer comments or ask questions will be required to attend meetings in person. Okay, now the red's off.
So then maybe we're opposite, maybe it's this way. All right, I think that's it.
Okay,
Yes, I think that's why the meeting hours sound.
okay, great. We did get communications, one from the Somerset County, the circulation plan, public notice, and they posted a draft circulation plan. I took a look at it, thought it was out of date, the data was stale. The NJDP case number, the suspected hazardous substance discharge notification. We received that, right?
Not much use, gives the
Yeah.
location, but doesn't know what the pollutant is.
What was it? Did they determine what the hazardous material was?
Apparently not.
No, we only just planning that. Planning to clean it up.
Okay. Is anyone here for an item that's not related to the agenda, that's tonight, any visitors? Not related to the agenda? Okay.
Hi, Aaron Duff, 51 Crestview Drive in Bernardsville. Do any of you sworn in, Mr. Warner?
Public comment not related to an application.
Correct. I wanted to comment quickly on the Equinet application that was in today's paper. Quick recap, the board had voted to extend the,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Sabo was just saying something that's appropriate. While it's not on the agenda, it is a pending application. By pending, I mean hearings are pending, at least for the time being. So we can, give a procedural comment or question as opposed to the substance.
Correct.
Or merits of that
Correct.
pending application.
Absolutely.
Understood. Yeah, as you know,
You let me know if I'm overstepping.
I don't have the ESP, wish I did, I'd be playing tomorrow's lottery number.
Sure.
So if we're gonna keep it to,
I'm happy to-
procedure or questions, go ahead.
Sure, and it's really more about procedure in general. So
Sure.
the application was adjourned to allow the applicant to conform its building to the QLRP. And at the time, it was determined that, there really was no downside to it. There was no, as Ms. Warner indicated, there was no risk of a default approval or anything like that. And, they were trying to make the plan better. Fine. I just read today and the chairman's comment in the papers, made me think back to Much's testimony on this particular application that under questioning from Ms. Hazelton.
I'm sorry, this particular application.
Excuse me, AIR.
Yeah, but that we can't talk about.
I'm not gonna talk about it other than to what his state would. I'll try and rephrase. It may have been stated that applications that had been, the chairman's statement to the paper was that the stormwater DEP regulations had changed since the application was originally submitted. And it has been stated, or, it's potentially the case that applications that pre-existed that the new regulations, the enactment of the new regulations are grandfathered in, and therefore do not have to comply with the stormwater regulations. So all I wanted to, put forth is this is a property that our own. Equinet, thank you. Correct, on Mill Street, on corner of Mill Street, the Equinet property, our EC has stated is an environmentally sensitive lot.
Like, Mr. Duff, you're getting into the merits of the Equinet application.
I would-
When the
my point
Equinet
is-
application, Mr. Duff, I don't want, I'm responsible for the proceedings to abide by the law. So I apologize that I have
No.
to interrupt you, but it falls on me.
Okay,
And you're getting into the merits of an application, of course, Constitution and due process being what it is, and very important, and we're subject to it as well, we should be. Equinet's not here. And if and when the Equinot proceedings continue, as I recall, they have until the end of September before their extension of time for this board to act expires. And either they're going to pick up before then, or, they're gonna be probably dismissed without prejudice because, they don't pick up by then, and the board may have gotten to that point, that's TBD, to be determined in September, what happens, but we can't get into the merits of the Equinet application. We can get into the merits of the AR Common application once we open that proceeding.
I'll
I think
confirm.
it's summarize basically, you're pointing out that what's absolutely true, if an application is before us, they're grandfathered. Yeah, if a new application is submitted, they're not grandfathered, and I completely agree.
Right, so that's the law,
That's
where
the
he
law.
was beginning to go next was.
I won't mention, I don't think I even need to mention Equinix or any individual. All I would say is that developments that are in the pipeline and existed in the pipeline prior to the enactments of these new stormwater regulations.
Once the application is submitted.
Correct.
Correct. That's the Dunbar case, and yes.
If I trust you. What all I would say is that when a developer approaches this board, I respectfully submit that the idea that, you know, we're essentially locking in development rights for, you know, applications that have been going on for a long time by extending, those development rights undermine and contradict the current stormwater management plans, comprehensive plans that have been enacted by our DEP. So I would just respectfully submit that when and if the board is approached at some later date with a extension request, that it consider conditioning such extension on a stipulation by that applicant that it will abide by those new stormwater management regulations.
And if when the board wishes to consider that, I promise the board I'll advise you as to the legality or lack thereof of same at that time.
Thank you.
But legally, I believe the board understands your.
Thank you, I believe it.
And there may be, you may wish to contact Trent, that's what I mean. And I'm not being facetious.
I'll leave that for another
I'm
day.
not being facetious, but the law is what the law is, but of course, laws change.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else from the public on something other than the.
Catherine Peachy. Do I understand correctly that Mr. Brightly, you're leaving?
I'm sorry.
Not right now, I hope.
Not, do I understand that you're leaving?
I don't know who you heard that from.
It was in the paper, and I'm glad to hear that it wasn't, that you're not?
Mr. Brightly, as I understand it, as there's a resolution that appointed him for this year, at least for at a minimum for certain matters, if particularly those that he's continuing on, and at a minimum, so he is here pursuant to a resolution and a new contract with this board, as am I, and as is Mr. Zabel.
Okay, good. Because all I was to say, if you are leaving, I wanted to thank you for all of the attention and detailed review that you provided for the town.
I hope you get many more opportunities to thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, no old business. Our new business is just to review the bills. They're pretty straightforward with me, but.
Yeah.
I think they're all Mr. Brightly's.
Yes, I have my.
You earned them.
Get the light hanging on them.
I second.
All right, so a motion? Do we get a motion?
Don't we motion?
Pay the bill.
Yes, I didn't hear this. Go ahead.
I move we pay the bills for the bill for $4,951.25.
I'll second it.
Roll call.
Ms. Gardner,
Yes.
Ms. Geller,
Yes.
Mr. Graham,
Yes.
Mr. Harwick,
Yes.
Mr. McQueen.
Yes.
Mr. Simoff,
Yes.
Mr. Walden,
Yes.
and Mr. Zazarino.
Yes.
The motion carries.
You sticking around?
Is there any request for an extension, or is this just a placeholder?
I think that, then you should just leaving those headings in there, right, just in case something pops up.
Yes.
H, we don't have any request for
Okay.
extension.
No,
That's what I thought, okay. And we are at the main event, which is AR Bernardsville LLC. And, we're ready for your statement.
Terrific. Good evening, Chairman, board members, John Wichiscala on behalf of AR Bernardsville. Pleasure to be back before you tonight. Want to thank everybody for coming out for a special meeting this evening. This is a continuation of the hearing. When we were here last, we had actually concluded our direct testimony. There was public comment. We spent a fair amount of time talking about conditions, potential conditions. I have spoken with Mr. Warner. There was, at least I'm aware of one member of the public who's not available at the last meeting that I understand does want to make their own public comment, and we take no issue with that. We also are requesting the opportunity to reopen. We have brought one additional witness back, John McDonough. He's a professional planner. As the board will recall, we talked about the various deviations. Some of them more minor in nature, where you've got gambrel roofs in certain locations as opposed to flat or pitched roofs and a few other details. But we did spend a fair amount of time talking about the height of this structure in terms of stories. It is and remains our position that our proposed project is consistent with the original development designs that went into the development of the redevelopment plan, the redevelopment agreement, in terms of 4 stories on Morristown Road. And obviously we have the topography and we've got that lowest level of parking and storage. That being said, we spoke to in the alternative, to the extent the board believe that variance relief is necessary. We are requesting that. I spoke to that issue when we were here last on July 25th. But just for the record and for the board's edification, we thought it would be best to bring a professional planner in to provide planning proofs with respect to that variance relief. We understand Mr. McDonough, who will be sworn in and qualified, will be subject to any cross-examination, obviously by the board professionals, and any member of the public tonight.
Okay, you got the ball, so.
Yeah, but that's, Mr. Chairman, and certainly it's the discretion of the board to reopen for Mr. McDonough's testimony. You heard the reasons why. As I recall, we received a memo from Mr. Zabo to my left, August 12, listing 5 potential deviations from the redevelopment plan. Apparently one is primary concern is being expressed to be able to address from a planning perspective for the applicant, frankly appropriate, unless and until those deviations were clarified and potentially before the applicant, have the applicant know, at least initially intended they had it before the application. Now they may not. They may have as many as 5 deviations. So I think it's appropriate for a planner to testify and for the board to allow the applicant to reopen for that purpose, recognizing, as the applicant's counsel stated, everyone, including members of the public, had an opportunity to question this additional witness. So that's my advice to the board. Ultimately, it's the board's call.
Okay. So, would you like to, which would you prefer, maybe first?
I'd like to call Mr. McDonough in the first instance, yes.
And I'll swear Mr. McDonough in. With your right hand is free. Do you swear to God or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Mr. McDonough, can you please provide the board with a brief summary of your educational and professional background and licenses that you hold?
Sure thing. Hi there again, everyone. My name is John McDonough. I'm a licensed professional planner here in the state of New Jersey. That license is current and it's in good standing. I'm also certified on the national level, AICP, the American Institute of Certified Planners. That certification is also current and in good standing. And this is what I get to do on a nightly basis throughout the state of New Jersey. So I get to see the nice full cross section of our beautiful state and your beautiful town as well, where I've been many times before.
I move that we accept John's credentials. He's been here before. He's been qualified previously by this board.
Yeah. We do, we're accepting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. McDonough, you're familiar with the project that's before the board, the redevelopment area designation, redevelopment plan, and the site plan application that's here this evening. Is that correct?
Yes, I am.
You've had the opportunity to review the memos and particularly the deviations that have been identified over the course of the hearings. Is that right?
That's correct.
I'm going to turn the floor over to you to speak to the project and then get into to the deviations and or variances that are before us this evening.
You got it. So, Mr. Chairman, what I'd like to do is use Mr. Zabo's latest memo to the board, August 12th, as a roadmap, I'll say, in terms of the relief that the applicant's requesting. As always, Mr. Zabo has sort of boiled it down to the board as to where we stand in terms of the relief that the board needs to consider. I know some of the relief may be subject to interpretation. I'm not here to debate whether the relief is or is not needed. I'll neither concede nor dispute. My analysis specifically focuses on whether the 5 deviations that are in Mr. Zabo's report meet the statutory criteria for grant of relief, and I find that all 5 do. I'll walk you through my planning rationale in that regard. Just by way of background here, again, my familiarity with the site, 3 tax lots here in block 25. Lots 1, 2, and 3 were about an acre that are developed. You've designated it as an area in need of redevelopment. Got excessive pavement out there, and certainly not contributing positively to what is a visually prominent corner in your community and a gateway to the downtown. The surrounding uses, as we know, consist of a variety of downtown type uses. We've got retail, commercial, religious. We've got that New Jersey Transit line. That's a boundary at the back of the property as well. That's going to be important because some of the relief that the applicant is seeking relates to that back portion of the property. The plan is for redevelopment for a very beautiful new mixed-use building that is going to accentuate and revitalize that corner there. Great detail, great concern for quality and aesthetic. Again, a beautiful plan with ground level retail and then 68 apartments up above, which is fully conforming with your higher tiers of zoning in terms of those usual intensity of use controls. The use complies, the density complies. The applicant is not asking relief for any of those higher intensity of use controls. We're in the PS-R Palmer Square redevelopment zone, and the stated purpose of the district is right in the redevelopment plan itself, which is to promote mixed-use development on this particular piece of property. The redevelopment plan is for the 3 lots that are before you. The applicant has followed that plan essentially to a T, but for these 5 deviations, which I would offer are relatively minor in nature when we consider all of the other controls that are cooked into this really well-written redevelopment plan and the laudable goals and objectives that underline it. The project substantially complies with the redevelopment plan, again, in terms of the use, in terms of the bulk, in terms of all those nice design conditions that you have built into the plan. So the relief is 5-fold, and you actually have severed in terms of the way relief can be considered here in the community under the traditional C criteria, where we would apply the balancing or the hardship standard that we see in the MLUL. That is specified in the redevelopment plan as to what type of relief would fall under that umbrella. And then there's also relief under the lower standard of a design exception, where we look for, instead of applying balancing or hardship, we just look at reasonableness and what we call impracticability. So in Mr. Zabo's report, he identifies 2 deviations that would fall under the C standard, that balancing or hardship standard, and then 3 deviations that would be the lower level design exceptions. So we'll take you through them one by one. The first relates to the RSIS de minimis exception for parking. You see Mr. Korak over there, who gave you extensive testimony in that regard. 102 parking spaces proposed, which meets the requirement under your local standard. Under RSIS, it would be 122 spaces, but of course the default in the RSIS is back to the local standard. So you've got justification right in the regulatory language of RSIS that provides the justification for that relief. Not to mention the extensive testimony from a sworn expert under oath that the parking complies. Second is the number of stories, somewhat of a technicality, because as you're standing out there on 202 in the corner, the building itself is going to be perceived as 4 stories. It's 4 levels. And of course, the overall building, which is measured both in terms of height and stories, the building height fully conforms. So I'll say the cube, if you will, the box of the building fully complies with the height and volumetric controls in terms of what your ordinance requires. The only relief is not for an added story on the top, but a drop down on the bottom to effectuate parking and circulation and to respond to the beautiful landscape that you have here and the way the site slopes down. So I've done at least 2 other redevelopment plans here in this portion of town, where we've had a similar situation where the parking comes in from the back at the lower level and you have sort of a walkout or a walk down, drop down type foundation in the back. The key point there is it's going to effectuate all the benefits of the project itself, all the positives that are articulated in your redevelopment plan, with minimal, if any, impact in the public realm. Again, this is a drop down and exposed foundation in the rear, get vehicles into and out of the building, not violating any of the purposes of height control in terms of blocking scenic views, creating negative shadow effects, creating an imposing or obtrusive structure along the streetscape. This is a drop down in the back where the parking is. We've got all trees lining the railroad line. That's the impacted portion of the property. So no substantial detriment in that regard as well. In terms of the justification for those 2 C-level deviations, I would offer that you can find justification under both the C2 balancing test as a better zoning alternative for the site, or under the C1 hardship criteria related to the characteristic of the land, not the building per se. I think this board well knows that to meet the test, an applicant either has to hit C1 or C2, not both. This application actually hits both, so I think it's double strong in terms of the justification or the proofs. Under C2, the positives of the application as a whole, we've got this case known as the Pullen case, which says whenever we consider the balancing, look at the application holistically, the redevelopment holistically. So looking at the project benefits as a whole and what this is going to do to that corner there, we see multiple purposes of zoning being advanced, including purpose A, the promotion of the general welfare with new housing stock and service uses, a nice complementary mix of uses here that will serve your community. Second, purpose M, which is our planning goal for the efficient use of land. That's what redevelopment is. Takes a developed piece of property, reuses it, repurposes it, and that's, again, consistent with our goal here as a deterrent to sprawl and development on the fringe where we're taking down trees or woodlands or forests, or sensitive areas. This is right here on a site that has been already predominantly cleared and paved over, so substantial improvement over that which is presently there. Purpose G, which is our planning goal to provide for a variety of uses in appropriate locations according to the needs of all New Jersey citizens, is going to be a nice diversified mix of housing types here and service uses, again, that will complement the downtown. And then finally, purpose I, the promotion of a desirable visual environment. I'll let the building speak for itself and the site amenities that go along with it. You've heard and seen a lot of testimony in that regard. I think our applicant has given great care to attention and detail. It's been an interactive process, and the end result, as I stand here now, is a simply beautiful project that, again, a visually prominent corner in your community. Those are all the project positives, counterbalancing them with the potential impacts. Based on all of the testimony from all of the witnesses before me and the evidence on the record here, relief for the number of stories, relief for the RSIS parking dimension, a de minimis exception can be granted without substantial detriment to the area or the zone. As I said, that extra story is really inconspicuous in the public realm. It's not to gain a height advantage, but to catch up with grade on the downside. And the parking supply, as I said before, will meet the local standard, and that's a real regulatory requirement under the RSIS standards. That's the C2 test, and if you don't like that, you've also got the C1 hardship test, which are practical difficulties related to the land. Here we have a building that complies in terms of height. The extra story relates to the land and the dropping down slope. Under C1, we have multiple subsections. Subsection B pertains to the topography of the land. A would pertain to the size or shape of the land. That's not the case here, but certainly the slope of the land is what's triggering the need for that extra relief. And I think the design here is responsive to that terrain. Whereby relief relates to the land and not the building per se, that's really a textbook hardship case, practical difficulties related to the land for an otherwise conforming structure. That goes towards the C relief. Now, the design exceptions, again, are a lower standard here, simply an element of reasonableness and impracticability. The three deviations there are the roof type. Remember, you have one portion of the roof that is a gambrel roof as opposed to a pitched roof or a flat roof, relatively minor portion of the overall building. It's something that came out of the interactions with the HPC and a recommendation from them. So it was really driven by your historic commission and an applicant that's being responsive and sensitive to same. So in that regard, we think that relief is reasonable and appropriate and certainly meets a standard of impracticability, which means serves no real practical planning purpose to correct or alter that deviation. Next, there's deviation related to providing interim power to all the units in the building. Somewhat unusual language that I don't typically see. We know that this site is going to be powered up to meet IBC standards or the International Building Code standards with the wiring that for emergency aisles and the like in the event of a power failure will go on. Also, the applicant is willing to stipulate the second part of that requirement is to put in conduits. So to the extent future technology comes into play, either on a temporary basis, a wheel basis, whatever, the infrastructure is there to support that. So to the extent that the applicant is not putting in an actual generator that could power the entire building, including all the units, we think that relief is reasonable and appropriate. We've met building code standard. Anytime zoning goes outside of building code, I think that's an overreach. And again, here we think the applicant has met the good spirit of the ordinance to provide all that infrastructure that will provide for future demand of technology when it comes online and if it comes online. Lastly, relief related to the facade entrance orientation. The fact that the front doors don't necessarily face the street because they're behind that archway, somewhat of technical relief. We do have an accentuated entryway or gateway to the development, but the front doors or the doorways are behind that element. So the literal requirement of the ordinance is not met, but we certainly think the spirit of the ordinance is met to have a demarcated entryway to those residential uses facing the street, although it's not a front entrance per se. It's I'll say an accented entrance. All of that said, we believe that the deviations meet the lower standard of relief of reasonableness. Again, interim power relief is reasonable since it meets IBC. We're putting in all that infrastructure to provide power to the units to the extent it comes available online in future technology. And then finally, again, the facade relief is reasonable since there's already going to be a gateway element or an archway in place prior to the doorway. With that said, I would offer that I believe this is a good application. It certainly has landed in a very good spot. It's been an interactive process, and that's what the land use law says it should be. The project, as we stand now, is in substantial compliance with really those laudable goals and purposes of your redevelopment plan and the underlying MLUL. Your master plan, of course, this redevelopment plan has been found not to be substantially inconsistent with the goals and objectives of your master plan. So the two are clearly aligned. The applicant is aligned with the redevelopment plan. So there's a good line there, a good nexus with your planning policies. With respect to the relief, the requested relief will have minimal, if any, impacts, and most importantly, satisfies the criteria for grant of that relief. So I would offer from a planning standpoint, this applicant has met its burden under the law and approval is warranted here. That's all I have on direct, John.
Thank you.
Bob Riley. Ours, the parking. Does this number include the EV credits? Remember we chatted about what the real number is? I just want to be sure the spread is accurate, between provided versus.
I gotta get my notes.
Obligated.
Mr. Chairman, while he's checking, can I ask Mr. McDonough one or two quick questions?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McDonough, is it your position that the redevelopment plan, for all intents and purposes, governs the zoning for this particular site?
Yes.
Well, if that's your opinion, then with respect to number 4, the deviation to permit emergency power generators, you made mention, if I recall correctly, of if one asks for something that's beyond the building code, the land use board being that one, if one asks for something beyond the building code, that might be an overreach. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay. If one agrees in the redevelopment plan that emergency power is required to provide conduits with power to each and every residential unit, then that would not be an overreach, correct?
not that aspect, no, but to provide the actual power, that's a substantial burden financially on any applicant. It's not-
I understand you're arguing that there's an impracticability to literal compliance with that provision, but for the board to recognize that that's a deviation that the applicant has to address, they're not overreaching because the applicant agreed to the language of the redevelopment plan, correct?
I don't know the history of whether this applicant was, I'm assuming yes, but I was not directly involved. I think I can surmise that yes, the applicant conceded to the.
Well, that's,
I don't know the
what-
timing.
that's what the council adopted, Mr. Warner.
I don't know when that language came in and if the applicant was privy to it when it came in, I don't.
Well, take back whether the timing of it. That's the redevelopment plan, and if what the redevelopment plan says what it says, that's what governs, correct?
Yes, and I'm not saying it doesn't apply. I'm not saying it doesn't
No, I
apply.
understand you're arguing for a basis for a deviation. Frankly, when you talked about the issue of potential overreach for something beyond the building code, that's when I jumped. Because this is a situation where, even assuming arguendo that this is beyond the building code, it's in the redevelopment,
Yes,
okay? So in that sense, the planning board would not be overreaching by recognizing that deviation and requiring the applicant to demonstrate an entitlement to relief therefrom, correct?
correct. I maybe to couch it better, I'll swap out the word overreaching for the word atypical. It's not something I typically see in redevelopment.
I'll leave the wording to be what it is. The latter is more preferable to me than the former, but I'm not conceding that it's all the way there yet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
I believe the number is 133, and then when you take the EV credit,
Yeah,
which is the law, it goes down to 122.
Okay.
That's the number that I came up with.
so
Yeah, we did go
it's
through.
accurate, it's good, that's the good number. I just wanted to be sure that what you just confirmed.
That's the Delta Bob, correct?
Well, that's what I have as being that requirement.
Does the applicant stipulate that that's the Delta or continue to stipulate that that's the
I think
Delta?
that, yes, we do.
Okay, then at least for the time being, Mr. Chairman, that's the Delta.
Okay, we will accept questions from the public of this
Unless the board has.
board first. Yeah, okay.
Questions?
But I'm sorry, it's up to the chair. Normally we do the board first.
As long as we got the lawyer out there. So, go, okay, guys.
Yeah, I have a question, relating to John Sabo's memo to us, and thank you for your comprehensive presentation. If you look at, having to do with the parking, we've determined that 102 spaces is okay, even though I don't feel that less 20 spaces is de minimis. 20 spaces, a lot of 20 spaces is a lot, square footage wise. But if we determine that 103 is what we determined, then fine.
And for Gardner, the minimis, as we discussed before, that's the language that the RSIS uses.
Yes,
It's not meant to be judgmental, meaning small.
well, but I'm being judgmental, meaning.
Right.
Minus 20 spaces.
Is not the minimis.
Yeah, yes, but well, saying that, the next sentence where it says household characteristics. access to mass transit, I don't argue with. Geographic location and availability of off-site parking resources. In your estimation, I assume you looked at the area and found this parking that other.
Love the downtown, yes.
Now, where would this parking be? And is this parking for the residents or is this guest parking? Would there be a charge for the parking? Most of the parking downtown is public parking. And if the overflow from this building takes the parking that exists right now, that's a problem, as I see it.
The testimony on the record is that the parking supply will meet the demand under the requirement of the ordinance, which is the basis for relief from RSIS.
I understand, I understand all that, but I'm just based my comments on this memo right here.
So the language, Madam Gardner, came right out of the RSIS. Those exceptions and those examples of where the RSIS permits employees some flexibility in determining whether or not there's adequate parking, whether it can be reduced. The decision was made by the governing body to reduce the parking because of two reasons. One, proximity to the train station. And secondly, because we're learning as planners and as traffic engineers that parking demand has changed over time. There are recent studies that have come out, one from Rutgers, particularly that survey a lot of these developments, and we're finding that we're over parking. So, to go back to this application, there was testimony presented indicating one, compliance with the plan, which is important. The technical deviation from RSIS parking, but RSIS is like, these are the standards we recommend. Now, some towns adopt those as their ordinance requirements for residential development, but not always. In this case, there's a different parking standard, but we still have to recognize RSIS because it's state law. But there's a recognition that these type of developments can function quite well at levels that are below RSIS. In fact, RSIS hasn't been reviewed and adjusted for decades. It's being reviewed now in light of all this new information that's coming up. Just to give you some background.
John, can you just, I think some of this would be repaired if you were thorough, if you would parenthetically remove III and IB, those last two terms are not part of the rationale for seeking relief. It is accurate that
That's right out of the statute.
they could be, it's out of the statute, but your commentary could say, look, 3 and 4 are not relevant here. They're not claiming that 3 and 4 justifies the deviation. They're just claiming that 1 and 2 justifies the deviation. And I would say 3 and 4 don't apply. I mean, if they were trying to base the case on 3 and 4. Yes, we would determine that, but I understand 1 and 2 and, with a follow-up statement about 1 and 2 on yours, and I understand you were just thoroughly giving the list.
Right, but, you know, the housing characteristics, what I was referring to, some of the background information that's coming out now that's indicating that household sizes are shrinking, that's actually increasing demand for apartments and units, residential units, but it also.
It's kind of like for the variances, I know this, for the variances, it's like, well, there's like A through I, all the different possibilities that you can see, but the applicant typically selects certain ones, as this witness did, says, well, it's this one we think, this one we think, and this one we think, and I think in this first one, what you're suggesting the applicant is requesting is under the little I, under little, the first two is what, it's just, you listed all 4, it's kind of like listing, well, here are all the ways you can get a C, a variance. And
Well, I wanted to show the board the entire picture.
the entire, and it's almost like we need to understand, but the applicant's only, not the applicant, your explanation says the first 2 are the ones that are relevant to seeking this deviation. The other 2
that's just my
are
opinion.
not relevant.
It's the first 2 are the most relevant.
Yeah, well, the other 2.
The applicant's free to present any other information they want to get to the other part, but you don't have to satisfy every criteria.
No, it says in the text, any one of these, I'm just saying. The 3rd and the 4th are not relevant and are not supported. So, but that's okay, they don't need that, they
They don't
just
need
need one to be supported, so.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
it's clear in the memo where Mr. Sabo gives his opinions. He has an A and a B.
Yes.
A relates to number 2, and access to mass transit. B relates to number 1, household characteristics. Pretty clear.
Yeah,
So I agree with
You
you.
just drew it like this, and then
Yeah.
there are 2 left over with no lines pointing. I just saying that that's what needs to be.
Yeah.
What's stated is just, we're just affirming what's stated. Okay, that's- In this particular, go ahead.
I have a question. Can you tell me what shopping centers you can reach using the Essex line?
I'm sorry, Mr.
Can you tell me what shopping centers you can reach using the Essex line?
Gladstone.
Gladstone line.
Oh, I don't know that answer.
Can you tell me how many web offices, factories, stores, places of employment you can reach using the Gladstone line?
Again, I don't know. I didn't do that, I didn't do that as part of my analysis.
Okay. Well, you did the analysis on the application of the RSSI exemption, so I thought you would have thought about that. Can you tell me how many people ride the train from Bernardsville every day?
I can't.
You can't. Well, according to the Somerset County Planning, transportation plan, in 2022, the average daily ridership was 64. You take away the students from that are from Gladstone PPAC, that number probably comes down to about 20 or 30. One of the reasons people don't use the Gladstone line is it doesn't go anywhere. You want to go to New York and you want to spend 2 hours going there? Okay. You want to go to Newark, you want to spend an hour to 2 hours going to Newark? Okay, I'm not sure anybody here is going to be going, too many people here are going to be going to Newark. If you want to go to Morristown, it's 2 trains. It takes you 2 hours to go 10 miles. You know, it's nice to say that the train station is a mass transit facility, but it really isn't because you can't use it for anything. So, you know, I find that as a factor in reducing the necessity for cars is elusive. It's not true. You know, if that train line was used by a lot of people going places that people were going regularly to Summit, you know, but when do you go to Berkeley Heights to go shopping? You know, that's not exactly what happens. So I find that considering the Bernardsville train station to be a factor in compliance RSIS standards to be not helpful. And secondly, although I understand that there is general evidence that shows that apartment houses require less parking than what was formerly in the case. Have we seen a study done by anybody that relates the number of units here, the kind of families you have here, to the number of parking spaces?
Yes.
We have?
Rutgers has just come out with a study.
No, I'm saying for this facility.
For this facility.
No, so we don't really have any evidence on the second thing. So I'm not sure I see how we can grant the RSIS exemption.
All I'll say is the RSIS has language that says you can look to the local standard as a justification for a de minimis exception. We'll get you the site, the regulatory site. But this complies with the requirement of your redevelopment plan. Your redevelopment plan has a ratio for parking.
And Mr. McDonough, can I ask you one question? RSIS is actually a maximum, correct?
Well, that's another factor as well, yes.
I have my problems with your analysis.
Mr. Horowitz, if I could just add a little context to your observations, you're right. Except that part of the problem is that you need certain densities around centers like the transit center, the railroad, to kind of foster the kind of services that you're looking for. And so facilities there, you build the density around it, then transit starts to react to that as part of a transit village concept. And if you take the attitude that we're not going to get any residential down here because there is, you know, we don't accept, we have to have RSIS and then what you're doing is you're going to frustrate possible future improvements. For example, the tunnel project is it's erected, that's going to open up lines to New York City. We have to plan for the future. Part of that is creating a scenario where we can entice governmental agencies like New Jersey Transit to invest in systems that will then support the densities that are coming around these downtowns, and the only way you do that is if you build it. You're not gonna invest anything if you don't have people there to use the facilities.
The railroad tracks go where the railroad tracks go. That's not gonna change for the next 50 years. Because then I don't hear anybody planning additional, rail transit. Maybe in the future, we have the densities, you might get buses, but maybe you won't. You know, is this, you know, when we were doing the downtown plans, we looked around to see if we could get a company to contract to take, people into New York. And so they didn't have to take the train. And we found that no bus company would do that, because it just wasn't the density of population. So maybe you're right, but we have no proof of that.
I see it all over. I see it in a lot. Why the state's been pushing transit villages is because the idea is to resurrect and to make viable these transit systems so we can get cars off the road.
I understand that, John. I just don't see it for the Gladstone.
Well, I'm not the one who votes. You have to consider the evidence. I'm not arguing, I'm presenting context so that you can make a decision.
Well, John, can you just, it's a minor thing, but it's been brought up now. Can you just add Lakeland bus to the railroad station? A lot
Add
of
what?
people, Lakeland the bus runs there and it's faster to get into New
And
York
some,
than it is to the
and
train.
some towns are promoting,
No, you can add it, that's all. It's, a bus is still considered mass
of course
transportation.
it is, and you could have, all kinds of systems that expedite people into the city or other locations. They have, you know,
I'm just saying, given the paucity of traffic on the rail, which is true. Adding in explicitly that it's not only New Jersey Transit, it's also Lakeland bus into your note, that's just more complete.
and you're right.
You're obviously picking people up at the same spot, but it's.
But busing is certainly
It
not.
doesn't solve the world's problems.
But what's the point? Okay.
I just had a question, as far as the testimony for, item 4, the power and conduit. I believe, the testimony was that the power wouldn't be supplied to the units, but the conduit would be installed to every unit?
That is correct, which really is the literal language of the redevelopment
Right, I just
plan.
wanted to make sure.
In
that-
some respects, I'm not even sure we're seeking a deviation because we are, as we've looked very literally at any number of those provisions. The reason why we've got the, you know, we took a literal reading on the other deviation with respect to the entry to the residential portion of the building. We view it the same way relative to that section, so we're willing to comply with the literal one.
Okay, yeah, no, when I heard it, I just wasn't sure because of the way the memo was.
Well,
written.
yeah,
I just-
they're testing.
Right.
They're stipulating too is what's in code.
Right.
Correct.
What's in code is you have to have an EPSS for building this size. Its power has to be in dedicated conduit by code. What's in building code is you have to run conduit for electricity to the units. That's what's in the code. You have to run conduit. So they're not stipulating to anything that they weren't gonna have to build anyway, exactly as they were gonna build it. That's what they're stipulating to. They're seeking relief because the plan says, no, you're gonna provide emergency power to the residential units. The same will go with.
Well, the way the testimony sounded to me was they were gonna run spare conduits in case technology came
That's,
to the point. So the way that I interpret it is there would be additional conduits for emergency power at a later date.
we're gonna comply with the literal language of the redevelopment plan as it's written, as it relates to that.
The literal language of the redevelopment plan says. You're going to provide emergency power to the units, not provision space, not provision conduit.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, why don't I just read what it
The
says?
change, so we can, we have this planner with the language, he'll advise us, we can listen to him or not.
The way it was written, it was added in as a result of the board's review of the 26A that they came here trying to introduce an ordinance. And then the board made recommendations that incorporated into the plan that ultimately adopted. The adopted plan reads emergency power. To the extent required, UCC, which is now.
I'm sorry, that is not what.
That's not what the plan
That's not what the plan says. If you look at the plans that's attached to the resolution on our website, it does not have that language about to the extent that.
Power sufficient to provide inner power to the residential portion. In the event electric services is interrupted, the requirement shall include the running of conduits to each unit to be proposed development.
I want to read something different.
What was, maybe that was the older version.
I'm looking at, that is the language in the adopted version we have.
Doesn't say to the extent.
Yeah, it does not specify to the extent.
Right.
It does not, I will quote again, it's under emergency power, it is on page. Oh, I'm sorry, 31 of the redevelopment plan, and it reads, emergency power sufficient to provide interim power to the residential portion of the development shall be provided in the event that electrical service to the development is interrupted. This requirement shall include the running of conduits to each unit within the proposed development.
But technically, you're not meeting the exact literal language, because you're not providing, if I understand correctly, and she keeps turning it off. The energy is sufficient to cover the residential.
You're not meeting in any way, shape, or form. There's no need to have.
I'll say the same
clause.
thing.
There's no need to have a clause in the redevelopment plan if you're just restating what's in code.
Right, Mr. Chairman, we're agreeing,
Right.
so please listen. So they are still looking for a deviation.
Yes.
Yes, that's what I tell like that.
Well, I think we're willing to comply with this. I will tell you, we are certainly providing to the residential portion, emergency service necessary for life safety systems, lighting, elevators.
Yeah, that's not even worth, no. No, that's, but you have no choice but to provide that. You
And
can't,
we don't have to provide it for the elevators necessarily.
yes, you do, because you're above the limit in the code. You have to provide it for the elevators.
Right.
Check your electrical code. So the reason for this, just to give you a little background on this, is the state is mandating that we deal with climate change. And we have to have an addition to our master plan that deals with climate change. One of the theoretical effects of climate change is the loss of power for an extended period of time, which we've all experienced here. So we know we're gonna lose power. We know it's gonna be an extended period of time. And so to get out in front of this, given that this application is exceptional, the clause was added that says, you've got 68 units here, families, and when the power goes out, which it absolutely 100% will, you need to provide standby power to those people because we can't accommodate them in the library. Where are these people gonna go? What's the town, or is the town gonna be providing emergency services for these people? That's why it all has to be put into the plan to get out in front of it during the formation of this particular topic. That's why that clause is there. It is not about, provide the EPSS, which is mandated by building code. If you've got to provide the EPSS, it's got to be in separate conduit. All that stuff is there. So the only purpose for the clause is to say, you've got to provide power for the residents. That's what the purpose of the clause is, because otherwise there's no reason to even have the clause.
Yeah, we respectfully disagree because the language is what the language does not specify that every unit has to have full power, uninterrupted service in the case of emergency. I can tell you, and I'm sure Mr. McDonough will tell you, I've been involved in projects with thousands and thousands of residential units and know of no project that has mandated generator service for uninterrupted power for multi-family projects.
And I respectfully submit that
That's why
your
we're-
experience is not relevant. Okay, the past is the past.
Well,
Now,
we're willing, Chairman, to accept the language that's in the redevelopment plan.
which says you'll provide, now are you saying that this says it's just residential? It doesn't say, that's 68 units.
We're
right?
also providing emergency service, of course,
Well, of course, that's building code. I don't care about that. That's building code. It's full power, basic power. You're gonna provide standby power to the residents, to their units. Their refrigerators are gonna continue to run. Their stuff
I
is
don't
gonna,
believe the redevelopment plan says that,
it
Chairman.
does say that.
Where does it say it?
To take Mr. Horowitz's reading, and I went to the website and I pulled up what they adopted. I had slightly different language, it was modified by council, and it says, emergency power sufficient to provide interim power to the residential portion of the development shall be provided, which they're doing, consistent with the IBC. And this requirement shall include the running of conduits, which they're also doing.
No, wait.
So you can interpret it the way you want, that's what it says.
Well, you can provide conduits, but it has to be wide and held the residents. That's not.
You have a law.
Any resident here in Bernardsville knows the power outage doesn't go out for an hour. And it's a on the ground practicality that this has to be done for this particular, maybe unusual service. But we're looking after the people that eventually will live here.
I don't disagree.
And I know, you know, our chapter and verses we're supposed to be abiding by, but there are on the ground reasons why Bob has brought this up.
We would all love to have emergency energy when there's an outage. The question is it practical? Can they do it here in this development and effectuate the purposes of the redevelopment plan? That's the question.
The standard is reasonableness. Is the applicant asking for reasonable relief for a 68 unit boutique scale development? This is not a massive development in the context of what might be able to support that kind of infrastructure.
But for confirmation, and Mr. Chairman, I think this is important, Mr. Chairman.
I'm listening.
You're conceding that deviation relief is required from the literal language of the redevelopment plan with respect to emergency power for the residential.
I am not conceding or disputing any of the relief. All I've been asked is to give testimony and an evaluation as to the criteria, as to whether the relief meets the standard.
Assuming arguendo, you're deviating from that standard by virtue of not providing power to each and every unit for whatever an interim period of time is. The interim period? Interim power.
Does say-
Interim power. So that's an interim period. Power for interim, unless they wanted interim power, if they wanted interim power. Then what is your argument? Assume the board is interpreting this as requiring a deviation, the reason you're here. What is your position with respect to an entitlement for that deviation?
Yeah, again,
If the applicant has it.
it's a standard of reasonableness. The applicant is providing all the emergency life safety measures and the conduit. To the extent there's another Sandy and there's no power in that building for a month, there's still an opportunity to wheel some sort of power there or some sort of technology to power those units if need be. The infrastructure is there to meet the practical demand.
Why is it impractical for the applicant to provide the power or the availability of the power from the get-go for the units?
The critical mass is not there to support that kind of impact on the project.
What critical mass would be necessary?
I don't know.
Who are you suggesting should support those people?
I'm sorry, I do too many questions at
Who are you
once.
suggesting should support the people that are in that project when there's a loss of power like Sandy? Who should be doing it? National Guard? I mean, what do you think is supposed to happen?
I think those people will be subject to the same response as any other apartment dweller
For residential home.
or residential homeowner, yes.
Which is.
You're on your own?
Yes.
Okay.
Why is that unreasonable?
It's a question that, I'm not agreeing or disagreeing. No one's put forward what type of a financial hardship it is if you're running all the conduit to connect those units for basic electric. You know, you can do for certain things that it runs the refrigerator, maybe it doesn't run the air conditioner, that draws a lot. But there's been no, everyone's saying it's a hardship. Nobody said it's going to cost $3 million, it's gonna cost $100,000, it's gonna cost $10,000. You're running the conduit. That's one question. Separate and apart from whether the reading of the redevelopment agreement says you are required to do this or not. Chairman Graham, you're saying people have to go to the library. You have common spaces. So there's a club room, there's a fitness center, is there gonna be a shower in the fitness center? It's gonna be running water. Can you provide full services to those common areas so that the people who are living there, for your example, don't have to go to the library? I mean, that can't be a tremendous hardship to provide that type of. And I'm not sure that it's adequate, I'm just being a devil's advocate, that no one's put forward how expensive it is to give basic, refrigerator and a few lights in each unit. And, or what it would cost to have something in the building. And I don't know if that would be considered adequate, I'm being a devil's advocate here.
We've submitted 4 levels of power coverage for consideration, which has been stricken from the latest stuff, but there are 4 levels and there are different levels of cost involved. But we need, basically, the expectation is that there will be standby power essentially for, not instantaneous, not continuous, but that there would be power available for the residential units. And so we're getting twisted up on, frankly, is the word emergency. And the requirements, the emergency requirements for residential are the minimum. The standby power for residential, the EPSS requirements are very low for code. The providing power to the residential units so that they can stay there. Would be, that's a different level. And I don't know, the intent was you provide, the intent was supposed to be to provide power to the residential units, not just code, because if it was just code, we wouldn't have had a clause.
Oh, we have other general clauses that are in there, as well, Chairman. Listen, we're willing to stipulate to it candidly. There is no direction as to what, is interim. We're gonna take a literal reading. We will comply, with the requirement. And,
By
we will work
requirement,
with
the
the borough.
requirement, are you gonna be providing power to?
We're gonna provide interim power. We're gonna comply with the, literal language, Mr. Warner, that is in the document.
You're gonna provide interim power, is that what you're saying? Well, which would be wonderful, I mean, that's what. the intent
Interim
was.
isn't defined. Our intention is to provide emergency power, as we
There's
have
2 different
stated.
things. So there's the EPSS, which is the emergency power supply system. It's mandated by code. You have to implement it. All of your life-related systems have to be on that. It has to be in separate conduit. That's all IBC. It's required. No, you don't even need stairs. Has to be elevators because of the height of your unit. Okay?
Yes.
That's saying you can get out of the building. That's what EPSS is designed to do, is to let you safely evacuate the building. You can't live in the building with EPSS unless you have power to the residential units. So it's mandated, of course, you gotta be able to get out of the building. Your emergency lighting, your elevators, your fire panels, all that stuff has to be on EPSS by code. This is saying, look, we know we're gonna get another outage. We don't want people in the streets. We don't want them cast out of this apartment, sitting over in the library charging their phones, which is trying to support the rest of the town. So what would be best? What would be good for a premium top-of-the-line Class A facility is to have, hey, when you get these power outages, just like you would have if you bought a home and you put your Generacs in it, you're gonna sit there and be comfortable. Well, in these apartments, they're deluxe, they're great. You'll have power. And that's what the intent of the clause is. Not providing lighting to get out with elevators to work.
I have a question. You stated that it's unreasonable to require power in the. But how much, have you done an analysis of what it costs?
We don't actually know what, interim means.
That question was asked, yeah.
What is that? It means indefinitely? Does it mean full power for a full unit with computers and And hair dryers and
Your
everything,
electrical.
for unlimited periods of
Give
time.
you all those estimates and the amount, you can look up the.
But there's no guidance, there's no further guidance, Chairman, it's.
Have you looked at various levels of guidance, various levels of determining power?
He'll give you both.
Mm.
Your electrical engineer will give you both.
And maybe you can run it without the air
Because-
conditioning and some of the other.
Yeah, there's no guidance
HVAC
there,
shedding
no
module,
heat.
you can have all this stuff done and they'll ask you those questions and say, what do you want to do? The key is the people should be able to stay in their apartments when there's a power, when the power outage is going to occur. They should be able to stay in their apartments. So
And what's the path from here? I mean, we've been having a discussion. Should we discuss the interpretation of the language here to provide some clear guidance to the applicant? Should we let the applicant respond to the?
Well, I guess what we could do is write a condition that would define that. Now, that's even often say that, this division of the plan is met at some level less than full powers. I suppose we could write a condition that might, look at.
Maybe there's a standard under the NFPA 110 for reduced residential that I don't know if it would be palatable to the board or not. That's a level of reduced residential power, and I'm not an expert on anything but the law. I know who's at restaurants. Too bad. But if I understand correctly, there are different levels of power that can be provided, including something called reduced residential, which is under a particular standard. We have an engineer, but he's a civil engineer. In fairness, he's not an electrical engineer. I'm not an engineer at all. But maybe that's something that the applicant can make a determination either now or as soon as they can, that is a level of interim power they can provide over and above what may be mandated by the building code. I'm not an expert on that either. And that they could stipulate to that, and that might be sufficient for the board, particularly in light of the interpretation of the language of what is providing interim power to the residential portion of the building. I don't know, I just spitball that, that's a legal thing. But maybe that's something that.
But I don't know if we're prepared to take that, to deal with that.
Well, we don't have to yet, because they haven't offered it. There's no, if they're offering it, then we can address it. But is that something that the applicants want to look at? You're asking for an interpretation, you're asking for what's a standard, you're asking for guidance. I don't know if that's something that is a path to stipulate to a condition that would be sufficient to the board, together with the argument for deviation. I throw it out there.
Yeah, we're certainly willing to consider it, I just don't know the particulars on that, Mr. Warner.
You might want to find out quickly.
Just some guidance, engineering wise for you. You will probably find that partial provisioning of a residential unit is as expensive as full provisioning. Because it requires separate panels, probably requires separate conduits for the emergency power. When I did the numbers, it looked really like, why bother doing that, especially for your clientele? You're saying all the red outlets are gonna work, but everything else isn't. You need to look at it. It's unfair to move beyond what your original thing was, which your original request was, we want relief, relief from that situation. You really need to get the numbers for yourself to understand the cost of implementing the power to the residential units. Now it's up to you. It's only residential in the plan, right? It says nothing about the commercial and or the common areas, or, the, or the retail. So you need to think, if once, you need to just think about that. In other words, what makes this a premium offering from a retail perspective? Oh, well, you have power. So there's that.
Mr. Chairman, if we're at a point where there may be a path with respect to the emergency generator issue, I did want to follow up on a question with respect to the de minimis language from the RSIS, not judgmental exemption on the parking, because there was testimony that they met the standards. And candidly, I forgot in the ordinance, in the redevelopment plan, I forgot what it was. Maybe it helped with, maybe I'm not alone. Maybe it would help the board if they tell us, remind us, how they complied with the redevelopment plan and parking standard. At least I would like to. All that.
So looks like they're digging it out. So,
But there's a difference in RSIS,
I know.
it's based on bedroom count.
Have we, I don't think we've had any question. We've had testimony multiple times regarding compliance with the RSIS numbers.
Your planner testified that it's very important that you're in compliance with redevelopment plan parking requirements.
Right.
I didn't hear him say what it was and how much you're in compliance with it. If Mr. McDonough just said it, I apologize. But if you didn't say
the
it,
RSIS is voluntary.
RSI is there.
Guideline?
RSI, he testified that RSIS looks, among other things, to do you comply with the local municipal standard?
Okay.
If it's that important, I'd like to remember what it was.
In the redevelopment. The
Right.
redevelopment plan explicitly talks to it.
Right. And
Or
I'm
it's not-
assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Zabo, that he's correct when he says that you're supposed to look, among other things, what the municipal standard is? Yes. Okay. Sounds important to me.
But then
So-
the redevelopment plan would override the municipal standard, correct?
Well, I think the language, Mr.
There are development plan establishes a unique standard for this development, no one. It supersedes all others don't provide.
What's
What
the-
RSIS comes in only because the state required that to be considered. A lot of towns, we've done it here, uses the defaults, there's RSIS as the zoning requirement. We didn't do that in the redevelopment plan, we created a different one, which you're allowed to do under state law.
And what's the number of the plan, and what do you propose?
Now he's.
And how much do you meet it by?
The requirement in the redevelopment plan is on page 28, and it's 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit.
Which is the 102, correct?
Exactly, 68 times
plus
1.5 is 105.
Or 30.
And what about the redevelopment?
The non-residential uses except restaurants are 1 per 300 square feet.
And we talked about those parking standards when the plan came here on referral from the government.
What were the numbers, John? Either Johnson.
Those were the numbers that we agreed on.
So I
There's one, it's.
guess I'm questioning, is there even a deviation? So, Mr. Zabo.
So our total parking, right, is 134. We've got 32 that we've discussed multiple times or for the commercial. And 102 for the residential units.
So I'll ask Mr. Warner or Mr. Zabo then, if the law stipulates that local ordinances are the governing language, why do we need a deviation for RSIS standards?
Because the technical application, what the state did was they adopted the RSIS as a uniform standard for all municipalities, because every municipality had different standards. They wanted to standardize things to reduce costs.
So essentially, the deviation stipulates that we recognize the standard, but our local law stipulates otherwise. That's essentially what it's at.
It's not law.
Or ordinance. The ordinance can require more. Or it depends, you know, it can require more. It was modified to fit the development.
And it was to compare to like statewide, Hoboken doesn't have, towns like Hoboken don't have the same parking needs as Bernardsville. Or do they comply? Or yes.
Maybe our traffic engineer who does the parking as well can tell us what the numbers are. It's not that complicated, I didn't think it was.
Yeah, I was just looking at that, the redevelopment plan requires 1.5 spaces per unit, 68 is the 102. And then for the non-residential except for restaurants, it's one space per 300, which is 9423 divided by 300, which equals 32. The commercial, 102 plus 32 is 134.
And how many are provided?
134.
Oh, so they just met that.
So they have no provision for restaurants.
Well, we actually made a stipulation in the ordinance, that restaurants that exceed that capacity, they have to come back for additional parking.
Correct, or just have less seats. I mean, it's gonna be a limitation.
We talked about that at the time we were reviewing the redevelopment plan. There's a provision in there for constant monitoring and CCO, make sure they don't exceed the supply of parking on the site. We had that, it's in the plan, and we had that conversation.
So am I correct, Mr. McDonough, that in a nutshell, you comply with what the redevelopment plan requires, but you just made it, is that right?
We comply with the redevelopment plan, yes.
Okay.
It's not a test of whether you just made it or not, that's not relevant.
Okay, well, you comply, so to the extent the board is obligated pursuant to what you and Mr. Zabo, the experts say, to give serious consideration to that, they no doubt are.
Thank you.
So is it that, this was to be thorough, right? Basically, that's what John was trying to do for each of these. He says, I
No
know
good deed goes unpunished, Mr. Chairman.
Is this in fact even a requirement?
Technical application of the code, the state requires that you consider RSIS. Now, they modified the law, don't need the agreements to exceed anymore, and you don't have to send in the letters saying we granted these deviations, because frankly, those letters just piled up at DCA, nobody looked at them anyway.
Right.
So the board, should apply the redevelopment plan standard.
Right.
And based on the testimony that has been presented, consider granting the diminished section up to you guys, based on what has been presented to you.
So basically, we're just being thorough and we just want to cover the base.
Correct.
And make sure that this aspect is not basically challenged or anything like that in a way. It's just doing the right thing to cover it. Even if
Correct.
it's,
And you've had the.
well, you don't really need that, you know.
You had
by
the
this-
benefit of testimony from the traffic engineer, from their planner, from our traffic engineer, and you can consider the deviation.
On the story variance. John,
Yes.
for this jump.
John McDonough, there's two of them.
John and with John S.
John McDonough, you use the C2 criteria as part of the rationale.
Looking at the holistic benefits of the application, yes.
What would, so my understanding of C2 is you compare what's required to what's provided. You have to show the benefits or at least the intent of the ordinance. So if you, what would be the, the compliance issue if it was reduced to stories?
In the back, probably some, in my view, excessive and unnecessary grading to render that portion of the building or fill in the back so that doesn't constitute a story, so it's sufficiently buried, so it's not an extra story.
Well, does the ordinance, I'll ask this of John Zabo, does the ordinance use the existing? It establishes the existing.
It establishes the grade for
Redevelopment graded
the
408.
redevelopment grade established
Above 408.
based upon the.
No.
characteristics it says.
One at a time, please.
We established a grade because of the recognition of the grade differentials that exist, cross slopes and everything else on the property. We knew that there was going to be exposures, and that there was going to have to be a high calculation. So it was decided that 408 was a reasonable number to use based on spot elevation that was provided at the time.
And just to clarify, there's 4 stories on that 408
Well, that's my
frontage
question.
line. And to the testimony behind, could be filled to cover the foundation, but I don't think that's what happened.
When you looked at this part of the plan, did you look at the similar provision in the zoning code?
I did not, I looked at the redevelopment plan.
So the similar provision in the zoning code relates, I was one of the draftsmen of that provision. And I can tell you that that provision was intended to prevent looming buildings on the primary streets. And it was intended, when there was a uneven grade, to permit the extra floor, as long as it wasn't used for residential purposes. So that exception didn't make it into the plan. But if you're looking for the intent of what they were trying to achieve with that, fourth story requirement and putting that restriction in there, because this is in the southeast corner of the project, it essentially, the variance would achieve the intention of, the general intention of the zoning code plan of avoiding large buildings on major streets and in the back, where you wouldn't even, where, except for the people who live on Prospect Street and people passing by the train won't even see it, that wasn't gonna be a problem. So, you don't agree with you on some things, but I think that you're right on that.
I will certainly rely upon that as a foundation for my conclusion as well.
Yeah, of course. So, but I want to make sure, because this was initially your objection. And it sounded like
Well, it wasn't an objection, I said they needed variance.
you, so, but did you just argue against the need for a variance there?
No, it was a basic.
No,
Just-
He was, what Mr. Horowitz was doing was displaying how we forgive
Yes,
the stories in the rest of the downtown, and he was just offering some.
you were justifying the acceptance of the variance.
And yes,
There you
the granting of variance.
Granting of the variance.
Because let's not lose sight of the fact that the frontage, the main entrance, the main facade is on Montauk Road, and that's 4 stories, there's no question.
And the secondary road is my area, even though the secondary road doesn't.
Yeah, we're not talking a major deviation stories in terms of, we're talking inches in very limited areas of the building. It's not the entire building.
So it's not,
70% of the building.
the perspective is done is basically, if you look at each frontage, and you say, here's Norristown Range, and here's frontage. If you then view the railroad tracks as the back of the building, they're perfectly fine.
Yes.
You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to have that, and in fact, we would need that because we want that story open to the air for fire reasons. Then you look at the other frontage, which is non-area. Now it's a little different there. Then you get into the degree to which they have too many stories on the frontage because it's revealing the L1.
So the reason I was asking, because I'm trying to get down, I mean, we're doing a little deliberation here, which I don't know if it's always appropriate, but I'm trying to get down to the issues that I think require discussion still. So it sounds like the parking issue, we have code. This issue sounds like we have precedent for variances being granted.
You have a rationale.
Rationale. The power issue is still up in the air. So I think that probably requires the discussion.
So,
Yeah.
can we,
Don't forget the gambrel roof.
The Granville group is our idea.
can I, Mr. McDonough actually, he's got another meeting tonight and he makes it
Okay.
there. Can we just go through the questions? We know we are still, I think he's already testified as much as he can relative to the generator. We know we still have to. Well, I don't know. We know we still have to discuss that issue. But can we just maybe get through questioning from the board and the public and so forth, and then.
Yeah.
Think about the power. If the power, and this might help you make your decision, is that if the power goes off in the summer, that's not a big deal. It's uncomfortable and it might not be the best thing for your refrigerator, but in the winter, if you have a building of that size, any length of time there's no power in there, your expenses are gonna be replacing broken pipes, ceilings, anything else that could possibly happen, electrical wiring. It's happened to me in my own home. And that's a single family home. But if you're talking about 68 units for any length of time, not having power, the investment now might mitigate your investment down the road, and you're gonna have real problems. I mean, we've all experienced this. That's why we all have generators.
That's a good point. There could be, it's like anything, there could be insurance benefits, there could be any number of things.
I think.
Let's open this up to questions from the public. So at this point, for this witness, is there anyone in the public who has a question for this witness? Just a question, not a comment.
Based on his planning testimony.
Got somebody.
But just your name and address.
Mike Stevens, 12 Woodland Road, Bernardsville. Just want to clarify on the parking in reference to restaurants. What exactly is the requirement if there's a restaurant?
The restaurant requirement is different than for retail. Restaurant is one space for every 4 seats. And for retail, except restaurants, it's 1 per 300 square feet.
So how limiting is that for restaurants? And what was the part about if they go over the limit? They have to provide parking somewhere else?
No, I can address that. Basically, there's a calculus of what is required in terms of parking. The applicant has to maintain that balance. And there's a provision, and it carries into a condition of approval should the board is so inclined that any change in tenancy in the commercial portion will require a review and an adjustment. So if, let's say, a restaurant decides to go into a retail space, the number of tables and chairs will be calculated, and they can't exceed what the available supply is at that moment for that development. So it's going to be balanced going forward to COs. And if somebody wants to get a CO and there's enough parking, they have to get a variance. And they may not get that variance and they want to occupy the space.
COs, certificates of occupancy.
So I'm saying, it's starting, that's the way it works.
So as I understand it, maybe you got, the tables and chairs can't go too high. They gotta stay within whatever the parking.
So how
requirements
limiting
are.
is that?
Well, how limited?
Depends on how
Yeah,
the space is configured.
I could add something, just assuming all 9234 square feet of commercial space was one big restaurant, you could have 128 seats for 32 spaces, 32 times 4. And that would be it.
It's just,
Is that
it's apples
reasonable?
and oranges, it's apples and oranges.
The market.
Understand that a restaurant has a portion that's the kitchen and supplies and reception and so forth, and they have a section that's tables. But the point is that if they want to keep using the spaces for the restaurant, don't forget, that's 32 for all of the retail commercial. So there's a subset of spaces there. So let's say it's 10 spaces for the suite that becomes the restaurant. Well, that's 40 seats.
And the borough recently provided an ordinance that if restaurants in general exceed parking limitations that are approximate to they have to purchase out access to parking spots through other private means. So we have that in the new ordinance in place, so we govern and assist the board if there was ever a reapplication for any restaurant, not just this applicant. They would have to purchase space otherwise.
It'll be dictated by market. If the restaurant can't make it.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at.
Then they don't go in there.
Yeah,
It could be a bagel place with a stand.
Is that limiting on this development?
I think the answer to your question is legally, it's what the redevelopment plan dictates and the applicant agrees to it, so, and the applicant is accepting it as reasonable. Not too much, not too little, apparently.
My other question, just on that building height, so from Mount Airy Road, it's 5 stories. No,
That's not true. From the street, it's 4 stories.
how is it 4 stories?
No,
It drops down to the
southwest corner.
southwest corner.
The southwest corner is 5.
Yes.
On Mount Airy Road.
Correct. On frontage. Hence the reason for the second relief.
And just so I can visualize that, does anyone know what is the difference in height from the top of Rebecca Collection or whatever, right across the street to the top of this building? So that should be 3 stories higher, right?
This 3, yeah.
And how in the back, how big is it?
I'm sorry, technically, if the applicant can answer, if not, maybe someone else can.
I
We should start with the witness. If he can, the question should be if the witness, if he can answer.
But yeah,
He can testify.
sorry, I'm sorry. I don't know.
He testified to planning, and that included the story's deviation, so it should start with him. Your answer is?
I don't know the answer.
But
That'll be
that
2
complies.
stories higher.
The overall height complies.
It'll be 20 feet higher than Rebecca's.
That's it?
Yeah, Rebecca's is 3 stories.
No, it's 2, isn't it?
No, it's 3.
Well, this is a, I mean,
No,
if the board wants to entertain a discussion, that's fine, but we've lost track of an actual hearing.
You need to see. All right, thank you. Next questioner.
Thank you. No comment. I appreciate it.
Your name and address?
Sure, Aaron John, 51 Rescue on Lord Drive in Bernardsville. If you would indulge me, could you please elaborate on your response to Mr. Board Member Simoff's question about the upshot of, you know, the refusal, if it pertains to granting the height bulk variance relief that you're seeking? I believe you testified about regrading. Could you elaborate on that, what that means, what that would look like?
Sure, well, the first part of the answer was, we look at what the good that this application does as a whole, which is to reverse the stagnation, eliminate the sea of asphalt that's out there, and the overall site betterments that this would introduce. Now, on the counterbalancing side, the question was, how would you eliminate the variance? I mistakenly said if you raise the grade in the back, so it's not an exposed foundation, but I'm understanding that it's actually based on the existing grade. Thank you. Hey,
Carrie Hazelton, 3979 Brook Road, Bernardsville. I don't think you can answer this question because there's been so much discussion about the alternative power in the case of a power outage, but I'm sort of imagining if we have conduit to every location, and if that's where we land, if that's where we arrive, and I don't know what the board will decide. Should there come a time when power needs to be provided, and it will, where on this site with the building covering everything except for the central courtyard of garden, where will the generators, which would be sizable, be likely to be located? How will we find space for them to make that power available?
I don't know.
Thank you.
I'm Miller, 125 Washington Corner Road, Burnsville resident. Really just looking, I know you need to go. Just want clarification. No, I just want on the record and clarification so I can discuss it with AR afterwards, since you're here as their official representative. That you felt that it was an overreach for our zoning process to ask for things outside of the IBC, which is a minimum standard in this state. So if you truly feel it's an overreach, and that was your testimony at the time to this board, then that's something that I think we need to take up
Do you have
later.
a question for him?
So, yes, my question is, did you make the statement that it was an overreach to have the process of asking for things during the zoning process, that full plans, full engineering, full site plans, everything are not fully done and approved? Was that your statement?
My statement was retracted with the word, that's the way it was struck.
He retracted it. It's all
I
about-
used it, I
you
used
have
the
to change it,
substitute
right?
word,
You
which
change
I said atypical, I clarified with atypical.
I
I was
jumped
challenged
on
by using the
I
word.
jumped on with that one, didn't I?
Yeah, you did, but you know, it's something that my personal name has been brought up several times in this meetings. And
I didn't bring it up.
no, you did not, sir, but it has to do with just this process. So I just wanted on the record that.
He retracted on the record. Twice.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the public? Yes, please, when you're hearing Okay. Steve.
Stu Moore.
Right,
Yes, I'm
given
sorry.
the format now, what,
Are we done with public questioning?
We're done with public questions.
Okay,
And I
no
think
more
we're
public
done with board questions. And, I guess it's for us to a mini conclusion. right?
I think, the applicant stipulated to, one member of the public would requested to, participate, remotely. That was, not our practice. And then requested to, speak this evening, because he was able to be here in person, to make public comment, notwithstanding the fact that we closed public comment previously.
Right, so that's the next step. Right.
I believe.
John.
That would be appropriate, and I do know our court reporter's been going for about an hour and a half here, and perhaps we could take a 5-minute break, Chairman.
Sure.
10-minute break, 5 minutes.
We'll resume at 9:20.
Mr. Chairman, I'm dismissed.
You are. You are.
Thank you.